Hey guys, David East here, and in part 2 of this tutorial, we're going to take the flat website we made and add some animation. So in the previous video, we made this flat website using flat UI, and it's looking pretty good. However, a nice little touch would be if we added some animation to the text on the page. And we can achieve this animation using Css3. And fortunately for us, there's a style sheet out there already that encapsulates the animation logic within CSS. So back into Visual Studio, I'll add animate.css right above flat UI, and let's take a look on how we use it. So on the H1 of flat spinware, let's add a class, and we'll give it a class of animated and fade in left. So now I'll refresh the page, and we see that we get a nice little fade in from the left. And we could do the same thing for all the ones down here. So I'll just copy this class right here. We'll add it to the About section, and we'll also add it to the Team section. So I'll refresh the page, and we saw real quickly that flat spinware and We Make Amazing Things animated, but if we scroll down, we don't see anything for the team. But if I refresh on the team, we can see that it happened after the refresh. And the problem is that it happens as soon as the page loads, and we don't want it to animate until we see it in the screen. So how do we fix that? Well, fortunately for us, there's a jQuery event plugin out there called InView, created by Remy Sharp. And InView provides us with an event that triggers whenever an element is in view of the screen. To download it, just go to this file right here, and now I'll include it at the bottom of our scripts. And let's do an example use of InView. So right now, we're saying animated fade in left for the We Have Amazing People H1 under Team. And we want that to animate when it becomes in view. So let's just give it an ID for now, and we'll call it Team Heading. And we'll get rid of the class. So now at the top of our self-invoking anonymous function, let's add in the InView functionality. We'll start off by selecting the team heading, and then we're going to call the bind function within jQuery, and we're going to say on InView, we're going to pass through a function, and our function is going to take two parameters, the event and visible. And visible here is really important because this visible parameter will tell us if the element is visible on the screen. And if it's visible, we can then trigger some event. So we can say if visible, we can say this.add class, and we can say animated fade in left. So now I'll refresh the page, and we see that we get our fade in lefts for the ones that we can already see. And then now as I scroll down, we see that we get it faded in. And one thing we might want to mention is that none of these animations will look good on an iOS device, so we might want to cancel them in that case. To do so, we need to know what platform we're on. So we'll create a variable called platform, and that's equal to navigator.platform. And platform will return us a string that'll say iPod, iPad, iPhone, and that way we know whether we're on an iOS device. So we can create a variable called iOS, and we can say iOS is if platform equal to iPod, or if it's equal to iPad, or if it's equal to iPhone. Then we can create an if check right here, and we can say if not iOS, then we will bind the InView. So now back in flat spinware, we'll do a refresh. The first two fade in like expected, and we still get the fade in the InView. However, if this was on an iPhone or any other iOS device, it would not trigger. So now you might be thinking, so all I have to do is just create an ID and call this on every single element that I want faded in that isn't in the view of the screen yet? And that's kind of a lot to do. It's even a mouthful to say. So now instead of using an ID for every element we want to animate, we can be a little bit more generic and use classes. So instead of having an ID of team heading, we could provide a class and say fade in left. Now if we copy this, we could do the same thing for right. So we can say fade in right, and then the class we add is animated fade in right. So let's apply these classes to the elements above. So for home, we'll remove this to fade in left. For about, we'll say fade in right because we want them to alternate. We'll get rid of the ID of team heading, and we'll add the class for fade in left. And for contact, we'll say fade in right. So now back in flat spinware, I'll refresh. And you can see that we faded in from the left, and then that faded in from the right. And if we scroll down, that faded in from the left, and the next one should fade in from the right. And it does. So now that we have the text fading in, it would be pretty cool if we could do something with these icons. So if I hover over Sally the CEO, maybe some animation takes place on the icon. And in this case, we won't have to use the InView event plugin. We can just use CSS to activate a hover state. So we can write some CSS here, so whenever the showcase item box is hovered over, we can apply an animation to the icon. So we can say showcase item box. On a hover, we'll select the image. And just to show you that we can target the image this way, we'll change its height and width. So now when I hover over Sally the CEO, you can see that it gets big and stretches out of proportion. So obviously this isn't the effect that we're looking for. We want to animate this icon. And to do so, we can use Css3 Keyframes. To create a keyframe, we use the @ and then we're going to say Webkit Keyframes. And then we'll give it a name. And in this case, we'll call it spin. And this is the vendor prefix for any WebKit browser. There's also one from Mozilla and a native CSS3 one as well. But for this tutorial, we're just going to use the WebKit one. And keyframes aren't something that are native to CSS3. Keyframes are used in a multitude of animation technologies. Anyone who's ever used animation software, or Adobe Premiere or Adobe After Effects, will be familiar with this concept. So to start out this keyframe, we'll write the word from, and close it with some brackets, and then following that will be the word to. So the keyword from is where the animation starts, and then to is where it ends. And inside of these brackets, we can set CSS properties. So just for demonstration, we'll set the height and width to 200% again. Inside of the to, we'll set it back to 100%. So now that we have our animation defined, we need a way to activate it. So whenever someone hovers over a box, we can set the animation on the image. To do so, we'll use the WebKit animation property. And the first value of the property will be the animation we're applying, and we're using the one below called spin. Then we want to know how long are we going to do it for, and in this case we'll set it for 1 second. Then we want to know the effect, so we'll have a linear effect. And this also is a vendor prefix, so there's other ones from Mozilla as well as a standard CSS3 one. But just like before, we're just going to use the WebKit one. So now back in the browser, I'll hover over Sally the CEO. And you see that she expanded out to 200% and then contracted back to the regular size. Now spin wasn't exactly a great name for this. The icon didn't spin around, it actually just got bigger and then got smaller. So let's make it spin. So we'll use another vendor prefix for WebKit, and this one will be called Webkit Transform. And Transform allows us to activate some functions within CSS3, and the one that we're focused on right now is rotate. And this rotate is a function. We can pass through a parameter to it. So we'll first start at 0 degrees, because rotate takes a measurement of degrees. And then it'll end at 360 degrees, thus spinning all the way around. So now I'll hover over Sally, and she spins around. Now let's just say I didn't want Sally to spin around for just one time. I wanted her to spin around forever. After linear, I can provide the infinite keyword, and this will allow the animation to continuously go on. So I'll hover over Sally again, and she just keeps on spinning around. And also, since we're applying this to any image inside a showcase item box class, it'll work for any of these showcase item boxes, and even the ones up here. Now what if you wanted a bit more control over your keyframe, and from and to just won't cut it? Well, keyframes provide us with the ability to control it a bit more using percentages. To demonstrate this, we'll use a new keyframe called shake. So now instead of using from and to, we can set with percentages. So 25% into this animation, we can activate some sort of property. Then we also can do the same thing for 50% into the animation. Same with 75%. And then at the end, 100%. So again, inside of these percentages, we'll use Webkit Transform. And instead of using rotate, we're going to use the translate function. And this translate function will move the item along the x-axis of the page. So if we pass through negative 50%, it'll move this item to the left. Now at 50%, if we say 50% instead of negative 50%, it'll move it all the way back to the right. And we can provide negative 50% again for 75%, and then 0 at 100%. So that way it goes back to the original spot once the animation is done. So now I'll go up to the hover state and I'll change it from spin to shake. I'll speed up the animation a little bit, and so instead of 1 second, we'll say 0.4 seconds, and we'll get rid of infinite so it just happens one time. So now I'll hover over one of these icons, and as you can see, it does a little shake. So in this tutorial, we learned how to animate elements once they become in view on the page. We used Remy Sharp's InView event plugin combined with the animate.css style sheet. We used generic class selectors and applied them to elements to create a nice subtle fade-in effect. And the beautiful thing about using the Animate CSS style sheet is that it has tons of other animations out there, so you have the ability to get really creative. And we also learned about keyframes, where we can start an animation from the from and to keyword, as well as use percentages to control the animation as it progresses. And keyframes are really powerful. You can do tons of creative stuff with them, so I'm really interested to see what you guys are going to come up with. And just like always, if you have any questions or want something explained more in detail, just leave a comment.